Many more South Africans are feeling anxious and afraid tonight. Parts of the country are reeling from days and nights of public violence, destruction of property, and looting of the sort rarely seen before in the history of our democracy.
President Cyril Ramaphosa's address to the nation on Monday night sought to calm the fears of citizens, to reassure them that law would be restored, that the army would be called in, and the anarchy put to an end. But even while he read his speech from an auto cue in his typically calm delivery, the looting continued, and in the days since then, it hasn't stopped. I'm Amy Gibbings, journalist for News 24's multimedia department, standing in for Catherine Rice this week on The Story. We'll be looking at what the unrest in South Africa means for the future of the country, the political powers at play, and why authorities were not able to quell the violence, costing lives, hundreds of millions of rands worth of destruction, and thousands of job losses.
You're listening to The Story. It's a podcast by News 24. We'll speak to journalists and experts about the week's biggest story. This is what we saw, heard, and uncovered this week.
Disturbing scenes of unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng have been unfolding this week, and News 24 reporters have been out in full force to capture the mayhem. News 24 journalist Kavil Singh was one of our journalists on the ground in Durban. Kavil, it must have been a very stressful week. Tell us what you experienced in the field.
Thanks so much, Amy. It's been a very difficult few days, and what we've seen is something completely unprecedented in KwaZulu-Natal and in South Africa. The sort of unrest that has really swept across the province of KZN and Durban in particular has caused untold economic damage. There's been so much of violence. There have literally been bodies just lying on the street, cars burning, and obviously mass-scale looting. It's just been very difficult. It's been, absolute carnage.
It almost looks like a post-apocalyptic scene, and I know you were able to view the destruction on a helicopter ride. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, one would hope for beautiful scenes when hopping on a helicopter, but unfortunately, when I did so on Monday, all I saw was complete carnage. This was sort of around the peak of the unrest. The best way I can describe it is how you put it. It was sort of a post-apocalyptic Hollywood movie trailer sort of scene. When we got into the air, we almost immediately began seeing discord and unrest. With an aerial view, everything becomes much clearer. The first point we hovered over was the Cornubia Mall. It was absolutely devastating to see the condition of such a well-developed and well-resourced place left in complete tatters. There were luxury cars lined up for at least 2 to 5 kilometers. I mean, that's right. You heard me correctly. Many of the looters were people that were very well-to-do, rocking up, in many cases, in luxury vehicles and middle-of-the-line sedans. But generally across the city, smoke bellowed from almost every direction. I saw at least 4 or 5 burning vehicles over a very short space of time, and many looters were also very unhappy to see us. My pilot had also informed me that on several occasions he had been shot at during his sweeping flights. It was absolute lawlessness and carnage.
It must have been so frightening to be on the ground. What was the attitude towards journalists from people who were looting?
I don't think I've ever experienced the kind of fear that I went through as a journalist before. It was extremely negative, the attitude from looters. They were very threatening. They were extremely abusive. My experience was quite scary and really One of the main incidents occurred on Tuesday, also around the sort of peak of the unrest this week, on the Amgeni Road area, where the Macro and Value Center shopping mall was being looted. I was threatened. A group of 6 men armed with blades, pangas, knives hurled many racial expletives at me and threatened to cut open my face. Suffice to say, I had to head out of the area quite quickly, and even then, one of the men questioned why I was being let go. He questioned why his fellow looters were letting me go. It has been excessively difficult to report because of these threats, and our lives have been at risk on more than one occasion.
I'm so sorry, Kavil. It's scary to hear how quickly things can escalate in this environment. Did you feel the police had any control whatsoever of the situation?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think straight up it would be no. But it's difficult because national police, SAPs in particular, were very seldomly on the ground. Metro police, private security, and community groups carry the bulk of the burden of the unrest. I covered the length and breadth of the city, and I'm yet to see proper public order policing members. This has been one of the key factors in the unrest. Even private security groups have bemoaned the lack of support from national police. The police minister will have a lot to answer for.
Did you get a sense that there were simply criminally minded opportunists, or was there a feeling of political basis for the unrest, in your opinion?
I mean, this was very well coordinated. I think everyone's agreed. It's common cause that people were certain areas were blocked off. Authorities were prevented from entering certain parts of the city. But this was definitely very well coordinated. I would say it would be a combination of criminally minded opportunists and sort of politically motivated reasons. You most certainly do have political manipulators, but we also have organized crime syndicates that really saw an opportunity to take advantage of all the chaos. And they really pushed forward and did what they always do. It was sort of a bonus day for them, and with almost no police in sight. And in the length of breadth of Durban that I've covered, there were barely any SAPS. And with Metro Police stretched thin, criminals were just absolutely running wild.
Kavil, thank you for your time and your work on the ground.
At the beginning of this unrest, there may have been some people who sought to agitate for violence and disorder along ethnic lines. We know that the majority of our people have, out of principle, refused to be mobilized along these ethnic lines. However, what we are witnessing now are opportunistic acts of criminality with groups of people instigating chaos merely as a cover for looting and theft. There is no grievance nor any political cause that can justify the violence and the destruction that we have seen in parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng.
In his speech on Monday, Ramaphosa pointed to the violence being driven by people fueling the unrest along ethnic lines. We're now joined by political editor Quanita Hunter to break down the politics behind the chaos. Quanita, this was seemingly triggered by the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. Take us back to the legal developments in his case and, of course, his arrest last Wednesday night.
Well, you would know that the then acting Chief Justice, C.C. Kampepe, had earlier this month ruled that former President Jacob Zuma was guilty of contempt of court by failing to listen to a previous constitutional court order that instructed him to appear and cooperate with the Zondo Commission of Inquiry investigating state capture. Then he was also sentenced to 15 months behind bars. He had until the Sunday, so he had 5 days to hand himself over. And if he had not, then police had 3 days to do everything in their power to ensure that he would be in a correctional facility. Jacob Zuma defied the court order, insisted that he would not go to jail. His supporters tried to undermine the court judgment and the state as a result. And then there were a lot of threats of violence we saw at Nkandla. There were even reports of guns and fears that there could be violent altercation when he eventually goes to prison. But on Wednesday, there was a very different picture. News 24 reported how one Major General Nonhlanhla Zulu was behind the peaceful arrest of the former president. She went to Nkandla all by herself with no firearm, with no uniform, and she directly negotiated with him for hours until we saw on that Wednesday evening last week, Jacob Zuma being driven to the Escort Correctional Center. He's been serving his sentence. He's currently in the hospital wing of that. But a few days later, there were incidences of violence in KwaZulu-Natal. But by the weekend, it spread into complete unrest, both across KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. What you see now is no longer a protest against the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. What government says that it is well orchestrated economic sabotage. Some people are going out to call it, the early signs of planned insurrection. And now there's information as to who is behind it. That's where things are, as thousands of people have been arrested. What you see now is people die in stampedes, in lootings across malls in both provinces. You also see people dying as a result of vigilantism by communities standing up to protect their properties and to protect their businesses. We saw absolute pandemonium in a township, Indian township called Phoenix, with a concession by the Premier, Sihle Zikalala, that this unrest is actually stoking racial tension in the country. And then also concerns around food security. You'd see long queues all over KwaZulu-Natal as shops were completely looted, and there are no basic supplies for people in that part of the country.
The scenes of anarchy will potentially spill over into other provinces. What is your opinion? Is this a possibility?
I think that that's a real concern, and it's probably the reason why preemptively they've sent soldiers to places like Eastern Cape. But there has been, some sort of preemptive measures in other provinces. For example, the Eastern Cape, where government has, come together with the taxi association in trying to say, "Don't you dare." Obviously, it depends on what happens, how organized this is in other provinces. Definitely, government is worried that it can continue in other provinces. They're taking steps, but what's really, really worrying is that while the sort of mop-up operations are starting in places like Alexandra and the Johannesburg CBD, Durban and surrounding areas is still very much on fire. They haven't yet, let alone stopped the looting, stopped the unrest. You saw malls being burnt down, fuel stations being burnt down after it was looted. And you're not seeing a real headway in this regard. That's why it's very important to note that despite government saying that the focus needs to be on finding the instigators whom they seem to have identified. News 24 has also reported that a former state security agent loyal to former President Jacob Zuma, Tulani Romo, is named as one of the 12 main instigators of the unrest. On Thursday, we're reporting that former MK operatives are identified as those at the center of the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's a very, very, very dangerous situation. And I think government, as the Minister of Defence conceded to Parliament on Wednesday night, was found with their pants down.
Quinita, things really aren't looking good, and South Africans don't have much faith in the government to restore calm. In your opinion, are ongoing shortages of food and medicine now a possible scenario going forward?
I think government has warned that themselves. They know what the disruption to supply lines, the disruption to logistics, the disruption in terms of food warehouses and medicine warehouses will have, not only for KwaZulu-Natal, but for the entire country. But at the same time, there is a call for not to panic buy, and so that's the sort of duality that exists now. To say, do not panic buy, but at the same time, yes, there is concern. There's concern about the shortages of fuel and the shortages of bread, among other things. I think that government did not foresee the consequences that we have. Definitely, it was an intelligence failure, and I think it's going to take a long time for the country to recover. But for now, you see the heartbreaking queues of parents waiting to find formula and nappies for their children, and people who once owned businesses and once, were employers themselves, standing in queues waiting to get their hands on a loaf of bread.
And finally, Ramaphosa himself. Is it not time for him to take questions from journalists directly? Many people are getting fed up with the lack of detail he gives in his addresses, and people deserve more transparency, don't you think?
Absolutely, and that has been something that I have been calling for, especially this week. On Monday, when the president addressed the nation, he was scant on detail, did not answer the real issues that people had, and subsequently said that the security cluster would have those answers when they addressed the media, but they weren't those answers. It's only with public pressure that you saw government ministers on Wednesday and on Thursday now go out to public communities and then engage with the media and further, give a sort of some insight as to what actually is being done. The appointment of special prosecutors to prosecute the looters and deny bail as part of economics, calling it what it is, economic sabotage. You then have police minister, the police sort of getting more resources and rubber bullets, etc., being flown to KZN to assist police there. And so you see now some effort, but a lot of people are saying that it's a little too late, and the president was perhaps too far removed from the unrest.
Yes, thank you so much for your time, Quinita. That was News 24 political editor Quinita Hunter. I'm Amy Gibbings, and this week's episode was produced with the help of Catherine Rice.